Delighted you could make it. Thank you to our panelists. Their bios are in your program. So we're not going to do a whole lot of introductions, and I'm simply going to hand this session over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Nice to see everyone. I wanted to make one small note, which is that I'm no longer with NPR. I think wrong, but I was there for a long time, and now I'm an independent journalist. I would like to start with Richard Caperton. He's OPower's Director of National Policy and Partnership. And at that organization, Richard works with companies that want to help their customers save power. And I wondered if you could talk to us about what these companies are doing to help their customers save power in their homes, and are customers' expectations changing for what role they want their companies to do in their electric companies to play?
Sure. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for staying. So let's set a baseline here, which is that energy and electricity use is a low salience, low mind share issue for many consumers. It's 2% of their household income. If they reduce that by 20%, it becomes 1.6% of their household income. Nobody is making dramatic life decisions on 0.4% of their household income. But at the same time, they see a lot of change happening in this sector. They see technological change. All of a sudden, they're aware that there's rooftop solar out there. They know they have some alternatives. That's always in the back of their mind. And then they also have a lot of change happening in their relationships with their other service providers. Think about their financial services providers, their banks. They no longer go to the bank. They take pictures of their checks, and that's how they cash them. Or checks. Who uses checks even? So, a dramatic change in how they've related with other service providers in the last 10 years, and they're not seeing that with their energy companies for the most part. So, even though it's a low mind share, relatively low salience issue for many people, they know they need to do something, and that's an opportunity for energy companies to take advantage of. The utilities can improve customer satisfaction dramatically by meeting customers where they are, but more important for us in this room is that we can get better environmental outcomes. We can get people to save energy by taking advantage of that industry shift and the changing consumer expectations. And the people that are going to do that, and then getting to your second question, Elizabeth, are the companies that understand what the customers want and the ways they want that information. So we've done a lot of polling across everywhere that we reach customers. We work with more than 90 utilities in 8 countries in Europe, Asia, and North America. And we find that while there's a lot of difference, people use electricity differently, people pay different amounts, there's actually a lot of similarity. And we have identified 5 universal truths about energy consumers worldwide that I think are interesting. The first, and this isn't a surprise, is that everybody wants to save money. So glad we spent a lot of time polling on that. The second one is that people want personalized individual energy insights. That's interesting. The third is that they want to know how their energy usage compares to their neighbors. That's really interesting. You can do something with that. The fourth is that they want this information from their utilities. They don't actually want it from other companies. They trust their utilities, and they want to take advantage of that relationship. And the fifth is that the utilities are not meeting that customer need. They're unsatisfied with their utilities today. So we are working with utilities to address those 5 demands and get people to reduce their energy consumption. And we can talk more about the results we've seen, but we have seen to date, we have helped people save 6 terawatt hours of electricity. Now, I know nobody thinks in terawatt hours. That's the same as taking the states of Hawaii and Alaska off the grid for a year. So that's the type of results that we're seeing with these programs, and looking forward to talking with you more about it.
I wonder if you could just tell us quickly, is there a big difference in the kinds of companies that step up to work with you and other firms like yours and those that don't, the utilities that are going for this and those that aren't?
Yeah, so we work with utilities, like I said, around the world. In the United States, we work with utilities in regulated and deregulated markets. We work with investor-owned utilities, with municipal utilities and co-ops. We work with utilities in every region of the country. So in many ways, there is no difference. Like every type of utility wants to work with us to help their customers save energy. Now, when it gets a little more granular, there are places where the state regulatory incentives drive more interest in energy efficiency, and we tend to be focused in those markets.
Okay, great. And I wonder if we'll move on to Kathleen. Is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy Efficiency in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And I wondered if you would tell us what are you seeing from the Department of Energy as far as what people are doing to save energy, and how do you make them do more, and companies as well, and what's working and what's not working?
Yeah, terrific. I think, and I'll thank my colleague here for teeing up some of the challenges here with energy efficiency, because certainly, if you just go about your everyday life, it is low mind share. So how is it that we get people to engage in this energy efficiency thing, which we also know is the best way for us to be using energy, which is to not use it, right? Not using those kilowatt hours, but getting the same services out for the energy input that we do use. So really being as efficient as possible. So certainly we see a number of things that are working. I guess one of the main programs at the Department of Energy that is doing wonderful things for this country is our Appliance Standards Program. So that one is one where it's not so much about what people are doing in their homes, it's really how the government can work with our manufacturers to agree every few years on what are the group of inefficient products and how do you take them off the market, so that when people are out to buy products, whether it's your dishwasher or lights or whatever, that you're buying from a more efficient group. And then certainly EPA's got a wonderful program, Energy Star, that can take it to the next level. But so what are we doing or seeing in addition to that? I guess under this administration, one of the exciting programs we rolled out was called the Better Buildings Challenge. So that's a leadership challenge. And what we've seen is that organizations of all types, whether it's food service, industry, hotels, hospitality, office building owners, are taking that challenge to demonstrate that they can achieve 20% savings or more across their whole portfolio of buildings. So that not only gets you the savings, but it really encourages organizations to put the right management framework in place to, one, get the savings, but then keep those savings going because you're now organized to manage for energy, which has been truly, I think, one of the missing parts of the equation in this country is in part because of the low mind share and because the person who's typically operating a boiler, say, is typically held accountable for having good conditions or good environment in the building and is typically not challenged to make it as efficient as possible. This brings energy efficiency into the C-suite, and you get the management framework in place to keep tapping into the savings that are there. So those are some of the things we see, and certainly we also see great interest in what's up and coming with some of the exciting new technologies, and indeed there are some. Solid-state lighting, just great new lighting technologies that truly are going to revolutionize the way that we see and use lighting in this country, and I guess I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. Nihar Patel is North American Vice President for North American Sales for Toyota Motors, and I'm grateful for you for being here, and I think we've all noticed something when we've been driving along the roads or stopping at our filling station. Most of us still do it. I guess some people just plug in, but and that is that prices are really low, surprisingly low for gasoline these days. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what impact those low gasoline prices are having on sales of fuel-efficient vehicles and what auto companies can do, if anything, to deter consumers from saying, well, prices for gasoline are low, I guess I'm going to buy a big gas-guzzling vehicle again.
That's great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Great to be part of this panel. So I think you have to take the long view in most of these things. I think as maybe a couple of folks in panels this morning mentioned, you shouldn't be making knee-jerk reactions or reactive approaches just because a particular price or a commodity is trading at a low level today. It will probably change in a few years coming down the path. I think the way we look at things is under the strategy called Smart Mobility Strategy that has 4 pillars to it. One is certain ecology, the other one is comfort, convenience, and then of course safety. But let me stay focused on the ecology side. When you think about things like the Prius that are on the road today, 20 years ago that research started. 20 years ago, I'm sure the price of fuel was much lower than it is today at the pump. And you've got to stay, fairly focused on making sure that the problem is reducing CO2. The problem is whatever miles that are driven, let's make them more efficient miles driven. So whether it's putting more hybrids on the road, and there are 7 million of those globally with Toyota badges and Lexus badges on them, that's roughly millions of inefficient product taken off the road at the same time. So you look at it as a positive and also an extra benefit on top of that. But then about 20 years ago, we started research on hydrogen, on fuel cells. And for us, that's the next 100-year plan. So the fact that price of crude is somewhere sub $50 today, we need to look well beyond that. We need to continue focusing on what it's going to be 10, 15, 20, 30, X, Y, Z number of decades down the road, and continue making sure that we stay dogmatic. We are not going to back off of our approach to say, whatever the consumer is driving, whether it's petrol vehicles, diesels, hybrids, plug-ins, EVs, fuel cells, they're all going to be ratcheted up in terms of efficiency. So your petrol car today is far more efficient than it was 10 years ago. And it will be that much more efficient 10 years from now. But I think the electrification of the automotive industry is happening with plug-in vehicles, certainly hybrids if you include them in electric batteries, pure electric vehicles, and I think with us and some of our partners kicking off the journey on fuel cells and hydrogen, I think the next 10 to 20 years will look a lot different in what people will be driving, and hopefully, irrespective of what the petrol prices are, with a combination of industry, government, academia, et cetera, we will see a stronger push on cleaner technologies.
I noticed while other car sales were up, Prius sales were down compared to last year, compared to the year before by I think 12%. Is that right? Something like that. Yeah. And I'm wondering. I'm sure Toyota's not doing backflips about that fact, and I'm just wondering what have you done? Have you adjusted your manufacturing so that you're just producing fewer of the cars, or are you doing something else to try to get those cars into consumers' hands?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think when you are the lone provider of hybrids in the marketplace, you certainly have a very large market share. That monopoly changes once more competitors come in. So I think that certainly gives you the chance to reduce your market share to a more efficient level. But then I think we also offer a lot more product within our portfolio. So almost every Toyota product and almost every Lexus product has a hybrid. So the customer doesn't just have one product to choose from. It is certainly capacity constrained because the whole world, as I mentioned, is very Prius addicted. And so we will certainly get our fair share of it, but we don't have to be dependent purely on Prius to sell our hybrids, sell our plug-ins, and sell our other efficient products. It'd be great to sell more than what we're doing today, but I think when you're selling 250,000 Prius products in the U.S., that's nothing to be unproud about.
Great, thank you. And our last panelist is Kateri Callahan. She's the president of the Alliance to Save Energy and knows a lot about everything having to do with energy efficiency. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what is coming ahead in Congress that might have an impact on energy efficiency. I know there's some bipartisanship there, which is a bright light in our often very argumentative Capitol Hill, and I wondered what you can see about what might really happen and how much of a difference it might make.
So she leaves the hardest question for the last person in the fill-in. Predicting what Congress is going to do is not something that I could make a living on, but I'll take a stab at that. Before I do start, though, I just want to give a nod to Nihar and Toyota and say anecdotally, one of the reasons, at least for me, that I didn't buy a new Prius this year is because I'm driving an 11-year-old Prius that has 165,000 miles on it, and the darn thing won't die, so I can't get a new one. But let me just say that there is bipartisanship building and growing around the notion of energy efficiency and really the idea of energy productivity, of making our economy more productive even as we're reducing energy use. And that's something that is attractive to policymakers of all ilks and to conservatives and liberals alike. We all want a stronger economy, and I would argue that worldwide everyone wants a stronger economy. So energy efficiency can do that while also lowering energy costs and improving, protecting our environment. So it's a win-win-win, and policymakers, I think, get that. We coined the term, I think the Alliance did, a lot of people use it now, including IEA, that energy efficiency is and should remain the first fuel. And the reason we say that, there are a lot of proof points for it. In the United States, we've been able, over the course of the last 40 years, and a lot of this is because of appliance and equipment standards, CAFE standards, building energy codes, we've been able to double our energy productivity, meaning we're getting twice as much GDP out of each unit of energy in the United States. That means we're saving about $450 billion a year, and it means we're avoiding putting up 2 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. But we're not alone in this. IEA just released a report, their MarketWatch report, that showed that in 2011, the 18 member states that were surveyed saved the collective amount of energy through energy efficiency equivalent to what is being consumed annually by the entire continent of Europe. And that translates into about $734 billion a year annually being saved. So policymakers sit up, they take notice, and we hope that something will get done. There's a lot of partisanship in the Congress. We're having a fight right now over the Keystone XL pipeline. Once we get through that, I think the bright spots that we're seeing is that the two key leaders on the energy committees, Lisa Murkowski in the Senate and Fred Upton in the House, already have released their vision and the outlines of their vision for comprehensive energy legislation in the United States, and they want to see it get done. A pillar on each side of the plans is energy efficiency. So I think we'll see some things work there. I think the challenges for us and also the opportunity, one is cheap energy. Prices matter, and it's to get people motivated to take action. The higher the prices are, the better the motivation. The other challenge I think that's out there is really making people understand and really believe what's happening right now, which is that you can untie for the first time economic growth from growth in energy demand, and that's a hard concept for people. The Economist just released a report, and they said that the trend, I want to get this right, the biggest innovation in energy today is to go without, and we have to have people believe that, and I think we'll get something done.
Great, thank you. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about the low prices, the same topic that we were speaking about with Mr. Patel. And can you tell us what do those low prices do to the willingness of individuals, families, companies, changes that they need to make to become more energy efficient?
Well, I think it's like with anything else. The more expensive something is, the more you're going to care about it. So how do you deal with that when we have low energy prices? I actually look at it as an opportunity right now because we can lock in some policies that will allow us to continue on this path of ever greater energy efficiency without having to have the consumers involved and engaged in it and making challenges. So appliance and equipment standards, getting the inefficient products out of the market, providing consumers with a lot of choice, but not allowing inefficient technology that has been surpassed by new innovation to stay there. And I would point to CAFE standards. About 70% of the world's light-duty vehicles now fall under CAFE standards. That's about 55 million cars worldwide. So even with low gas prices, manufacturers are required to make products that meet a certain efficiency standard. And if we can keep taking those up, I think that we can, get over the hurdles that are there. And the final thing I would say, and this is a bit controversial, but if we would price carbon, if we would just price carbon, get rid of the incentives that are there for conventional fuels that we really don't need anymore, particularly when prices are so low, that would be a game changer. Nothing would drive energy efficiency like pricing carbon, because most energy use is based on carbon.
Would anyone like to rebut that or add on to that idea on the panel? Nobody wants to. Oh, go ahead.
Not on that. But if I could add a little bit on the low cost of energy, I think that's an interesting question, and I think that Kateri points out great things, that it is we need to keep investing in energy efficiency. What we see is that there are state regulations, and the details vary by state, but in many states, state regulators require their electric and gas utilities to make cost-effective investments in energy efficiency. And when electric prices are like they are today, relatively stable, those investments are pretty stable. But when natural gas prices fluctuate, today they're low, there are many energy efficiency investments that they were making 5 and 10 years ago that were cost effective then and are no longer cost effective. And that leads to a bad cyclicality in the investments in energy efficiency. And we need these utilities and state regulators to start investing now when prices are low, to prepare for times when prices are potentially higher again, rather than waiting until they get more expensive to start saving people money.
And I wonder if you might point to an example of the kind of energy efficiency investment that companies were making 5 years ago and are not making today.
Sure. So there was more gas utility interest in companies like OPower that provide services to help their customers, to provide insights to their customers, than there is today.
You mean utilities that burn gas or make electricity out of gas?
Utilities that distribute gas.
Oh, distribute gas. Okay.
Right. That send gas to you and I to burn in our households.
Okay. So gas is so cheap. Why
save money using less of it?
So I wonder whether this plays a role yet, or maybe it's too early. There's in some states there are in Colorado was the first efforts to reduce leaks of methane through the pipelines and things like that. Do you get involved in that in your work at all? No. Okay, leave that one alone. Okay, great. I was expecting some questions from you all. Perhaps I don't have them yet, and I will. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mr. Patel.
I think I do agree with what was mentioned earlier about should be looked as an opportunity to invest. Again, I'll point to an example that's probably a little bit Star Trek-y, but should be considered seriously as we look out into the next 20 to 30 years, is the word hydrogen. The state of California, which is where I'm based right now, is really putting its money where its mouth is. Clearly there's a top-down edict, if you want to call it that CARB has kicked off that says you will achieve a certain level of reductions in CO2 and greenhouse gases. But then I think rather than taking a very antagonistic posture against it, what we've seen is industry, oil and gas companies to some extent, academia, all come together and say, gee, so how do we want to collectively get together and plant the seed now so that 20 years, 30 years from now, we will have a better fueling mechanism that, again, people aren't going to take cars off the road by droves, but again, whatever you're going to drive is going to add very significantly less to whatever we're adding today into the marketplace. So California put up some monies. OEMs like auto manufacturers like us, we've put together a little bit of Kickstarter set of funds. Oil and gas companies have come in and said, okay, we are now going to be seriously putting some investment into the state to deconstruct the petrol station, and so you don't have 4 at every street corner. You might need 1 every 100 miles, sort of, for an example. And then academia have gotten together and created spatial mapping tools that allow states to figure out, so if you started with 0, how would you then lay out that grid? How would you lay out the station grid, for example? So I think it's an excellent opportunity. We're also looking to see if the East Coast, where we've already got 5 states committed to doing something together with us, to use that mindset and start putting together the investments that are going to be necessary now. Otherwise, 10 years from now, we'll still be having the same conversation, just assuming that crude stays between $50 to $70 a barrel.
Yes.
I want to just make a comment on this, too. I think we're at a really interesting time, and one thing that we haven't brought out yet, it's not just oil and natural gas that's getting cheaper, but solar panels are getting cheaper, wind's getting cheaper, and so you have cheap energy, but it's also there with new storage capabilities and even storing energy for your house and the battery in your car, and there's a lot going on there. Distribution networks are getting more flexible and more able to support things like microgrid. You've got Richard Caperton and intelligence and data flow to help us manage it better. And finally, you've got capital coming into the market. So it's really, I said, it's a challenging time, but there's an opportunity too. And I think we have to be aware of that, because the smart people are going to take charge and take control of that opportunity and change the world for us.
Yeah, Ms. Hogan wants to pitch in.
Yeah, so as we start to talk about all these other sources of supply, of course, one has to come back and speak to energy efficiency again, that first fuel, right? So just as there's innovations going on in so many of those other renewable energy sources, solar and wind, there's a lot going on in the energy efficiency space, too. I mean, we're sort of talking about the price of energy, but one way to look at the price of energy and energy efficiency is, what does it cost a utility to deliver savings, right, in contrast to building the next power plant. And as we look at the cost of energy efficiency, and there's a new Lawrence Berkeley National Lab report on this, you still see that energy efficiency from the standpoint of the utility is coming in at a couple cents a kilowatt hour. Energy prices are going to have to go down a whole lot to be able to compete with that price point. And at the same time, we sit here on the cusp of vast new amounts of information that will also serve to keep those energy efficiency programs low. Because one of the biggest costs to some of the utility programs is finding people that want to come and partake of the programs that we offer. And certainly that's one of the roles that the OPower programs play. And there's other ways of engaging people. But as they have more information in terms of where the opportunity space are, they'll be able to sort of reduce their costs or keep them low. So a lot of exciting things underway.
Okay. So one of the questions from the audience, and I wonder if anyone wants to dive in on this one, is how the grid should be modified to accommodate a large number of small sources. Someone else wants to know about how utilities might make a profit if the distributed solar power continues to boom, and I wonder, are these issues that anybody wants to dive in on? It's not something that I'm aware of anyone's
Say just
expertise.
From energy efficiency, one of the recommendations that we've put forward as our National Commission on the next generation of energy efficiency policy, and one of the prior speakers, Dan Arvizu, was part of that. Getting rate regulatory treatment correct in the United States so that investor-owned utilities are incented to invest in energy efficiency is really important. If energy efficiency is the first fuel, it should be treated on an equal and level playing field with investments in the supply side. So I think we see that as a really important movement. There are a lot of different ways that you can do that, but making sure that utilities can earn money by investing in energy efficiency to give to their shareholders, it seems, like a no-brainer. But that's what has to happen if we're really going to unleash investment there.
Does anyone do that now? How does that work?
There are some that do, yeah, they're able to earn a bit of an incentive on what they're investing. A lot are able to recover their investments in it. And it's only fair. I mean, the ratepayers are saving money. We believe that it's fair that utilities should be able to make a little bit of money on it, too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That the primary thing is allowing utilities to make money for these investments, just like they make money for building power plants and stringing wires today. Just a quick plug is that I'm on a panel talking about this very issue tomorrow with folks from the Rocky Mountain Institute and the National Renewable Energy Lab. That's at 10:45.
Tune in. Okay. And this is a very theoretical question and not in any of your specific areas, but I think it's an important one for us to think about. I did some stories about the new update that we got from the IPCC about the risks of climate change and the need for very urgent action, and it's a kind of a scary world out there that the scientists predict will come if we don't get it together and cut our carbon emissions quite dramatically. So someone mentioned a carbon price. I think that was you, Ms. Callahan, and I just wonder, are there ways that you see to decarbonize our economy, is the way the question is written, but to seriously reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in a kind of dramatic fashion, such as the one that the IPCC would have called for or calls for? What would you say is there a way to do that without a tax on carbon? Anyone want to dive into that one?
I'll be brave. Yes, you can do it, and you can largely keep us from going to 4 degrees centigrade by massive investment in energy efficiency. Where you get the money for the investment is, where the trick lies there. The investment in 2011, which I think is the latest information we have, was between $310 billion and $360 billion annually is being invested in energy efficiency globally. That's a lot of money. That's more than any other fuel save upstream oil and gas. But you're going to have to take that up to a much, much higher level to be able to get us where we need to be. But I've seen several studies that suggest that the most important tool we have for making sure temperature rise doesn't go to the extremes that it's predicted to right now is to invest in energy efficiency.
I'd say clearly you've got to keep investing in the right stuff, as has been outlined before. And I'm not sure how you best do it, but I think we've got to come up with a formula, if there's something like that, on how do you start managing or even reducing your usage over time. There's got to be some way in which, as we keep adding populations by the billions, by the time we look at the next 30, 40, 50 years, we're all going to want to have more of everything, whether it's water, this, that, and the other, including energy sources. And if we can come up with some better way in which the populations, that we're talking about, balance their requirements in a particular way, so that A, we're getting efficiency going, B, we're getting people being more conservative in terms of their usage patterns, then I think supply and demand can perhaps come to some level of equilibrium that's necessary. I'm not sure how you take that demand side away, because as is shown, anytime you add a little bit back into your pocketbook, the first knee-jerk reaction is, let me go spend it on something, and usually that something requires usage of some level of energy that we may not like is being used. And when you've got 3, perhaps 4 billion people in markets where energy efficiency changes are required significantly, those are the ones that are going to add to, in a positive way, when we start putting better technologies in place. But I think if we can come up with a better demand management model at the same time as supply, then I think perhaps we could have better solutions.
And I'll just point out, I think a couple of points that you probably already heard people speak to today. Some of the policies that are, or regulations that are being advanced right now through the administration are going to have quite powerful implications for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Certainly when Gina McCarthy talks about the clean power plant rule and the 30% reduction you can get by 2030, that's a big contribution. And, so that is really what a lot of the conversation about. We're up here talking about energy efficiency and the role that it can play, but one of the roles it can play is helping the Clean Power Plan be successful in getting those deep reductions and doing it in a way that really isn't costly for the American people. So I think those are truly, a lot of the solutions that we're looking for here, and I think you can see the feasibility and doability of these things.
Mr. Caperton, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see as the major barriers to making the kind of energy efficiency strides that your company thinks might be possible.
Sure. So actually on the last question, let me come back to that.
Yes.
I just always think when we have conversations about big solutions, small solutions come to my mind of like, here are things we could be doing today that would make a huge difference. So who here washes their hands in scalding, boiling hot water? Like, nobody does that. It's a terrible idea. It turns out that's what it takes to kill bacteria on your hands. And there's no health benefit to washing your hands in warm water or even hot water. You should wash them in cold water. And if you did that, it would be, if we all did that, it would be like taking 3 power plants offline. So let's just do that. And if everybody makes those sorts of changes, we'll get where we need to be eventually. So now that we're all going to freeze our hands, I think sorry, I got sidetracked there.
My question was, just think my hands are already really cold. I don't know, I'm thinking about that. Okay, I'll do it. My question had to do with what barriers your company sees from out there. What's keeping us from making the strides we could take?
Yeah, so there are the obvious barriers that I think everybody is pretty familiar with energy efficiency. It's got large upfront costs many times. It's got long payback periods. There's significant information imbalances. People don't know what to do. We find that information and getting people to pay attention to it is one of the biggest barriers, and that's what we are focused on, is getting people actionable information that are things that, get them to pay attention, they get excited about it, they engage in it, and then they actually follow through on it. And if you can get them to do that, that is much more effective. Get them to do that on small things, that's much more effective than yelling a lot about big things that nobody listens to and nobody actually does. So,
this is a really interesting point because there was a story that came out, I think the EPA must have had a press release or something saying that you shouldn't idle your cars before you start out, that in fact that was decades ago when carburetors needed to warm up, and then I walked around my neighborhood walking my dog, and I saw car after car after car idling, and I have to admit, one of them being my husband's car. And I just wonder, in this world where there's a cacophony of information everywhere, how do you get that really smart, well-sourced information to actually boil down to real people so that they do the right thing?
Sure. So there's an Accenture study that's done every year that talks about that researches how people engage with their energy companies. And they find that people spend, on average, in the U.S., 9 minutes a year interacting with their utility. That's only 9 minutes. A lot of that time is taken up with looking at the bills and paying the bills. Some of those minutes are taken up with a somewhat painful and annoying call to a call center. Like, you don't have much time to interact with people. So you need to make the best use possible of those 9 minutes. We find that people aren't going to go all of a sudden to spending an hour interacting with their utility or 2 hours. It's going to be this is a low salience, low mind share issue, and their attention to it is going to be relatively low. So we need to take advantage of those limited opportunities.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The Alliance to Save Energy has done a number of consumer education and outreach campaigns over its 40-year history, and some we've done with the EPA and DOE. And the studies that we show indicate that if you really want to motivate people to act, first of all, you have to have information to empower them to save money. But you have to impart that information in a way that they want to hear it and want to take action, meaning you can't say, no, you're doing something bad or wrong. Humor works, and making sure that you hit on those things that are meaningful to them. And that's really their pocketbooks, their homes, their family, extending out even to the community. But to try to make people take action because they need to do it so that the global temperature doesn't rise to 4 degrees, or because they're bad people if they do it, that just doesn't work. So if we could have, this is me on a soapbox, but the 2005 Energy Policy Act called for a nationwide consumer education and outreach campaign that would continue for 5 years and would have been run by the Department of Energy, and they authorized about $450 million to do that. That's what we really need, a sustained campaign with great information to empower people to take action that is provided to them in a way that they can grab onto it and actually use it. And it's a pity that as a government we've not been able to come up with that and really help people to save money.
So I have a two-part question. This comes from some of the people in the audience. It has to do with some really tangible examples, if the panelists might think about these things, about what people can do if they want to help with energy efficiency. Can you describe a couple of, something you can take home today to that people can do, and then I'll go with the second part of that question. Anybody want to dive in on that, Ms. Hogan?
It's winter, so one is just a quick home tune-up, right? One of the things people typically don't do is change the filters in their furnaces, which increases, the energy use as your furnace is working harder than it needs to do. It'd be one of the things that we try to promote is just an annual or biannual tune-up, pre-heating season, pre-air conditioning season. Another on top of that is the programmable thermostat. Great innovations right now in programmable thermostats, so that you can put the set points where you want them that make sense for you, and particularly keeping them low or high when you're not there. What's interesting is when you look across the country and you look at the percent of usage of these types of fairly straightforward technologies, it's really still quite small. So these are two very simple examples around some pretty high energy using pieces of equipment in our homes. And then there's always the one which is what your parents always used to tell you, right? Just turn off the lights when you leave the room. So there's some.
Okay. Mr. Patel?
Just in terms of what we do at the office, certainly we do a lot about promoting more ride-sharing capabilities, get our own cars off the road so that not everybody's driving individually. We have in California an HOV lane, so if you have two or more people, that may get you to the same location because you're going to the office. It takes some planning, but I think more and more people are doing that in our office. And then I think even though this is not necessarily our role to preach how you run your own home, we are certainly advocates to let our people want to go and learn more about solar, more about those kinds of technologies whose prices have come down significantly, and say, if you, again, the investment now approach, don't wait. Go ahead and make yourself more efficient so that 5 years, 10 years, depending on the incentives and the payback cycle, you will be running a zero cost facility called your home. So I think we try to have a wide variety of conversations, but ride sharing clearly is one we can point to that we're doing instantly that is starting to have some effect.
I think there's a lot of tips. Kathleen and Nihar have given some good ones. What you could really do if you want to see the wide array of actions you can take, you could go to our website at ase.org, or better still, probably go to energystar.gov or the eere.gov website. A wealth of information. You can even do your own home energy audit online. There's just a ton of different things that you can do. Heating and cooling the home is about 50% of the costs of the average family's energy bills, which this year home heating home costs are, I think, about $3,500 a year, $5,500 if you include transportation. So you're going to save some money. You'll be doing something good and doing your part, but you're also going to be benefiting yourself by putting money back in your pocket.
What about something I haven't heard a lot of talk about today, which is switching out lighting, LEDs? Does that make a big difference, a little difference? They're expensive when you go to the store to look at them.
That's a great question, because lighting is really one of the best opportunities out there now. So the LED lights that you can take home, they do cost a little bit more up front, you're right, but the payback is there. So what you do is you start by putting them in sort of your higher use lighting fixtures, right? And then the prices just keep coming down. Every time you go back to the store, the price tag has dropped a little bit further. So Terry might have the numbers. I don't remember off the top of my head what lighting is in people's homes. It's over 10%. Yeah, 12-13% of your home electricity bill, I believe. So it can also be quite a meaningful savings.
So I don't know, I don't have time to fact check this before I ask you this question, but this questioner says that the governor of Indiana cut our energy efficiency program, Energizing Indiana, even though it was working. In a high coal state like Indiana, how do we keep encouraging efficiency when we have big coal fighting us? So that's a question about how, is there something that can be done on a federal level to address the challenge that exists out there, that there are a bunch of utilities that make money by selling electricity. The more they sell, the more money they make, the more profit they make. They make even more profit if they get to build a new power plant. And how do you square that with the goals you're talking about, and how much does that reality deter the situation at hand, deter the gains that you hope to make?
Kateri talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's that if they're making money today by building and running power plants, then let them make money by doing something different. And what we see is that in the states where the regulatory incentives are right for energy efficiency, the utilities like energy efficiency, they like investing in it, and they certainly don't fight against it. In states where they're not allowed to make money with energy efficiency, and in fact they lose money with energy efficiency, it's only natural for them to fight it. And I think that's what we see in Indiana.
And is there a parallel to that, Mr. Patel, with what you're seeing with California and efficiency on vehicles?
Yeah, I think California is certainly on the leading edge of most of these things and tends to be, and so it starts usually with some policy that creates a lot of dialogue. Most people don't like it, but I think then when you step back and think a bit more cleverly about it, you say, okay, there's something interesting here. How do you then put your, to use a phrase, money where your mouth is? And if the state's doing it, if private and public institutions are doing it, if other folks are coming to party, then I think it creates a better environment where you can then step back and take the emotion out of the dialogue and then say, hey, this is the right thing for us to invest in and do. Everybody's got a piece of the pie. Let's now move forward. And I think, tackling zero emissions, I think, is one good example in California.
Does the industry or the government track fuel economy by state? Does it know? Does the average new car bought in California, say, have a much better fuel efficiency than the average new car bought someplace where the state has not put in incentives? Yeah. I mean,
there is a database, so you're able to track sales of everything. So you can tell that a certain vehicle portfolio is sold in a particular state, and then you can easily calculate that state might be delivering a much better footprint than other states. So there are clearly various dichotomies within the U.S. where you do have states like California that are the leading edge, but New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, because of their sort of plug-in environment that they've started focusing on, they're getting better and better as well.
And I'm sorry, I saw that Ms. Hogan had a comment she wanted to make, and I cut you off, so please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to speak to sort of the regulatory framework in this country a little bit further. I mean, it is true that the way our utilities deliver energy and the way that the rates are set is a state policy issue. So what is the role of the federal government? I think it really is to keep, as you were saying, keep the dialogue going and keep talking about the fact that we're trying to deliver systems that provide energy at reasonable cost really for the somewhat longer term. I mean, it's sort of what Kateri said too. It's like energy efficiency you want to have on par with other types of energy. Clearly, if you're planning a power plant, you're not expecting it to be in place tomorrow. You've got a 10-year lead time. So how is it your system will look if you do 10 years of investment in energy efficiency, and then you might not need the power plant? So we just need to keep having the conversation continue about the role energy efficiency can play in delivering the least cost energy system state by state by state by state.
Add one more thing to that. It's that the Department of Energy and Kathleen's team are doing a lot of work on helping states understand how to use energy efficiency. So it turns out that when somebody hears from OPower that they should change their thermostat setting or turn off their lights, that's a little bit complicated to measure. and states don't really know how to measure that always. But the Department of Energy, through their Uniform Methods Project, is helping states figure that out. And that sort of guidance from the federal government is crucial. If they were to help states, and I think you're doing this, help states design rates for utilities to profit from energy efficiency, so-called decoupling, that would be vital and would help move things forward.
I don't want to extend the conversation too long, but I think that there also is something else going on that we have to do in these states. So in Indiana, for example, that rollback in the efficiency program, some of the key proponents of that were the large industrial customers who saw that they were making their own investments in energy efficiency, and they felt that they were being charged for investment in energy efficiency in the residential sector that the utilities were making. And so we need to make sure that we educate folks that the costs for energy efficiency are less than they would be if a new power plant were going in. So I think that there's not a recognition and enough understanding, and this is just isn't Indiana. Industrial consumers in a lot of states want to opt out of these programs, don't want to have to be a part of it. We need to educate them that it's not a question of your rates going up because of investments here. It's a question of keeping your rates only going up so much by investing in energy efficiency versus not investing in it and having to build new power plants and spending a lot more money.
So this is a question that comes from the audience as well, and I haven't heard anybody raise this issue, which is mass transit. What role does mass transit play in meeting our goals in the future, and do you see it's stepping in to play a bigger role than it is now? Anybody want to say?
Take a stab at this. I think you see a lot of words like smart cities being thrown around nowadays, and I think that's probably a good kickoff where most cities are looking to see how they can make rail or subway systems, whatever they are, buses, bike lanes, and of course automotive, environments together. And I'm sure I'm missing something else. And make it easy for the customer, the user. Myself, if I want to take a subway from, downtown New York to Queens, but then I know that I want to get a car that takes me from my station to someplace else, that's something that we could facilitate. That's something that we can connect with people so that they're not all driving to a location or all finding other alternate, means of transport. So I think transportation has a broader, role in playing to make the city smarter. I think there's ways in which we can connect broader roles of transportation, and probably by doing so, you can make, for example, buses more electric or buses using more hydrogen or things that we're working towards also, so that, again, you take carbon, hydrocarbons off the road, and you maybe make, the next electrification into larger people moving vehicles at the same time. So I think many cities are doing that, but you see that really moving at fast pace in European cities and probably some Asian cities as well, and slowly ratcheting up its course over here because we have a lot of old infrastructure that we still depend on over here. But I think those are things you could easily change over. I say easily, on a relative scale, and put a lot of positivity back in the environment.
This is a small question from, maybe it's a big question, but it's a question from one of the audience, and they want to know what you see as the primary energy source used to provide water for fuel cell vehicles. Can you tell us that?
Sorry, water for fuel cell?
Energy source used to provide water for fuel cell vehicles. I guess.
I hope I'm not misinterpreting your question. Our fuel cell is pretty interesting. It works with oxygen being sort of vacuumed in from the front of the vehicle. It's purified almost to a 100% level. And by the time it touches the fuel cell has actually been made where it's wet on its own. Normally you needed water surrounding it to keep that fuel cell going. We've developed a fuel cell that retains some level of wetness, so that promotes for the right use of the fuel cell. You can work with that with hydrogen coming through, and you don't need extra contraptions to do what maybe 10 years ago you'd have to do on the fuel cell. So I hope I didn't misinterpret the question. If I did, I can certainly address it, after this thing. But we can go through a deeper. I see somebody with their hand up. Maybe that was.
What's the primary source for the hydrogen?
So the question is, what's the primary source of the hydrogen? That's a great question. Right now, of course, a lot of it is based, the feedstock is natural gas. I think working with folks like the DOE and other industry folks, we need to continue pushing towards more renewable sources. So methane capture, which we're doing in California and Connecticut. Those are two live examples where you can go to landfills, capture that, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir over here, and use that methane to convert that both into natural gas so your CNG vehicles can be filled, but also into hydrogen. And again, both of those projects exist. We now need to scale up so the cost difference between renewable and non-renewable sort of disappears over time.
This, I think, will be one of our last questions. We're wrapping up here, and one of the things that also an audience member wants to know has to do with building efficiency, and are mandates important for getting big strides in building efficiency, and what kind of mandates are being contemplated?
So I do think that, we've sort of talked a lot about energy efficiency being low mind share, right? Some of the other issues out there with energy efficiency include things called the split incentive, where you have builders that build the building, and then the person who's going to buy and use the building is the one that's going to pay the energy bill. So the builder doesn't necessarily have a real incentive to make it be efficient. So what we have had in this country now for a number of years is a whole process of building codes, both commercial and residential. And it is a place where we've had great strides in the last 5 years, with the codes being increased by 20 to 30% over where they were prior, and actually where we were in 2009 was, some pretty good codes for that period of time as well. And this is the type of thing that these codes get pulled together by experts. They get, sort of a suite of measures that can get you to those savings. They get voted on by the folk that are going to actually be implementing them. And then you start a whole process of educating people at the state and local level on how to do the building practices that are required. Because I think we've also talked about how energy efficiency is sort of a people problem. But you get all of these people across the country involved in the architecture area as well as the construction trades, educated about how to do this well. And it truly is a great approach for incorporating energy efficiency into new buildings as well as major renovations. And I think, one of the most effective efforts we have out there at that whole building level.
I think maybe 30 seconds and then we're done.
So, and ditto to everything that Kathleen just said, but she said at the end that's for new buildings and major renovations. I think we've got to look at the existing building stock. Buildings in the U.S. use about 40% of our energy, about 75% of the electricity we use. We need to really work to upgrade those buildings, and one great way to start would be to require energy use disclosure in buildings and building energy labeling. So not to go so far as a code there, but to start by simply putting the information out about what the building is using in terms of energy. Thank you.
Thank you to each of our panelists. That was fascinating.
Thank you, Elizabeth.